Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Sandra McGinty, author of What to Do When You're Dead, a former atheist interviews the source of infinite being. Sandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. I tried to say your first name and last name all at once, and it came out Brawl for some reason. Thank you for having me.
No worries. It's usually me that butcher stuff up, so I feel glad it wasn't me.
Good.
No worries. Are you ready to get going?
I am ready to go.
All right, let's begin. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, I actually have two bits of, recommendation, and the first one is probably the most difficult for me, and that is to learn that marketing is a skill, not a brag. I come from a background where I worked in the back end of major corporations in communications and graphics. So I was always supporting a much bigger entity than myself. And that's when I discovered, when I went out on my own to put my own message out there, I discovered how shy I really am and how programmed I was to believe that whenever you talk about yourself, it's bragging. But in marketing terms, it's critical. In order to sell anything, you really have to be able to talk about what you're doing in a way that engages people and gets them wanting to be on board. So what I discovered was marketing isn't about selling or bragging. It's about how many people can you reach. And so every marketing strategy that I learned to adopt became all about that. The numbers were about how many people I could reach, as opposed to, how many people knew who I was. So the people that I reach, not only does that become the marketing strategy in itself, it's also the indicator of how successful I'm being at communicating. How well am I communicating? So one skill at marketing is a constant, you're constantly rebuilding that marketing skill. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about too, and I say this to all people who are looking to write their own book, and that is to spend your time learning how and writing the book proposal before you actually write the whole book. Because the book is an entity in and of itself, separate from how you present it to your audience and how you present it to a publisher. Because a publisher already has gazillion books that they're trying to market and trying to sell. They need to know, how do you fit into their already market, and where do you set yourself apart? And they want to know how to market you and how to market your book. So the book proposal teaches you all of that. It forces you to look at your market, where your book fits in, and also, how am I going to set myself apart in this market? So you'll visit Barnes and Noble and you'll look at the bookshelves where your book will go in, and you'll look at the books and the authors that are already in your genre, and you'll identify how you're different, and that becomes part of the book proposal. I spent an entire year working on my book proposal, and I would say that book proposal is what I sent out and what I got rejections on, and therefore learned a lot from as a result of those rejections.
And what do you...
So those,
I was just going to ask, what do you feel is the hardest part then about getting published? Because you mentioned about the proposals.
right? And the rejections that
Mm-hmm.
would come from that. And that certainly is the hardest part about getting published or looking for a publisher is having to get used to rejections. So especially if you're a shy person, as I am, and most writers I think are, uh, that aren't already marketers, but the rejection part laid me flat, I should say. Rejections laid me flat. Um, and what I mean is I really suffered from panic attacks from the first one. And I was afraid nobody would want me. I went into a terrible amount of fear over it. But when I finally said, all right, I'm going to collect rejections, because it was J.K. Rowling, the one who wrote Harry Potter, that she had 150 rejections before she finally got a taker. And that was, of course, was an inspiring bit of data. But when it actually happens to you, even the first time, it can be crucifying. But when I decided to change my mind and change the framework with which I thought about rejection to, okay, I'm good, I'm just going to collect them. The first thing I did before I sent that one out was I looked for the exact publisher who published the only book I know of that is similar to mine, which is A Conversation with God. My book is A Conversation with God. There is a book titled Conversations with God, and it was published by one of the publishers that I sent my book proposal to, from whom I got a rejection. But I wanted to know, who was the editor that actually published that book. And I found out he was retired. He was actually a co-founder of the publishing house that I proposed to originally. But in his retirement, he had a smaller publishing house, and he would publish books, about 6 books a year. And I sent it to him, sent my book proposal to him. And it seems like the minute he got it, he called me and wanted the full manuscript. And then it took a full year for that to be a completed manuscript and published by that editor. But that, I would say, is the hardest part, to deal with rejection and find your own way of dealing with it, because you're going to get rejected.
Well, let's talk a little bit about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
I would say my marketing strategies don't um, are don't work well at once. They have worked well over time. So I've tried to utilize, there are mega marketers out there who have an incredible talent of selling. My talent is in the skill that I demonstrate in the book and in my services. So um, my my book works well as a companion to my services, which are soul readings. I do readings of the soul in conversation with one's God self, from my God self to another person's God self, and I do them over the phone and so forth. So as I promote that work, and also my source talks, which I just simply stand in front of the room and perform the same ability, where I allow this great wave of vibration we call God to speak through me. As I promote those events, my promotional materials all contain links to and ways of purchasing my book. Launching the book has had to come through my own going public with my gift, with my ability, which is a very niche market. There's a very niche amount of people, small amount of people that really fit into that genre of spirituality. The alt spiritual is what I refer to it as, the alternative spirituality group. So reaching them specifically and then spreading beyond that hasn't been easy. It's just been a long commitment. And over time, that is how I've marketed my book successfully.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
So my favorite book, I have a lot of favorites for different reasons. I would say my favorite book with regard to books of my genre would be the Conversations with God books, because that book, when it came out, that's about the time when God started writing through me. I'm a former atheist, as is in the title of my book. So when God began writing through me, I really thought I was losing my mind. And so when I found a book, and this is a best-selling book, by the way, the Conversations with God books, it's in 37 different languages, and within my genre is a very popular book. But on the back of it, I recognized the speaker of the book was the same speaker that was writing in my journals, which really saved my sanity and saved the way that the work was moving through me, because had I thought I was losing my mind for any prolonged period of time, I would have shut it down and not allowed it to come through anymore. And I was at 39 years old when that occurred, and it had come to me in that way. God had come to me in writing before, and I can trace it all the way back to 4 years old. But I continually shut it down, not knowing what it was and not being able to get an answer from anybody as to what it was. But then I found this book where the way and the syntax of the writing was all written in the back part of the book, and so it essentially saved my authoring life as well.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
I really thought about that when you sent me the list of questions. And my favorite quote is actually mine. And I hate to say this, but it's true. It is my favorite quote. And the quote is, "Live life as if you die, but die as if you live on." Because it's such a profoundly hopeful thing to think. Most people fear dying. But when you have an experience of the other side, there is no death. There's no such thing. There's just the body passes away. Then that means this life is some preparation for something. So how do we prepare? Well, we prepare by getting to know who we are beyond the body. And that's what my job is all about, helping people get to know what they are beyond their body.
Well, Sandra, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
I can be reached at the easiest way to remember me is godscribe.com. Or you can look for my name as Sandra Sneed, SONDRASNEED.com. And there is a pop-up link to reach me directly. And please sign up for my Weisenheimer letters, because you'll get a free download. And that is, oh my gosh, I've forgotten my own free download. It is the 5 principles for quieting your mind and listening to your higher self. You'll get that as a free download.
Well, Sandra, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you, Paul. It's great being here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.